Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our public hearing this afternoon. We have two items this afternoon. Let me just first remind everybody to hand copies of your testimony to the clerk that's seated at the podium. Also, in terms of substitute speakers, please advise the clerk if you are substituting a speaker for your organization. And also, speakers will not be allowed to cede time to another speaker. Before beginning your presentation, please state your name clearly for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak. A yellow light in front of you will come on when you have 30 seconds left in which to finish your presentation, and a red light will come on when your time is up and will stay on should you run over. So for item number 6, this is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY20 operating budget for the Department of Health and Human Services in the amount of $239,492 for Access Harm Reduction Grant. Action is scheduled immediately following this public hearing. And there are no speakers for this public hearing, so this public hearing is closed. But we need to act on this item, so I will need a motion.
So moved.
Councilmember Katz has moved, and Councilmember Friesen has seconded. Ms. McMillan, can you just briefly discuss this item, please?
Yes, this is a $239,000 grant from the state, and it supports 3 efforts in the county to address the opioid addiction problem. One is the Leave Behind program, which allows the county to leave behind naloxone and Narcan with households, and also to do urgent follow-up program. Our STEER program, which stands for Stop, Triage, Engage, Educate, and Rehabilitate, and this is an effort to engage people, especially at overdose, or people who might engage with the criminal justice system, to deflect them from that by connecting them with services to address their addiction, and then also continued training in Narcan and naloxone. It is all state funding, and so the chairs of the joint HHS and public safety committees agreed that this could go directly to council for action and did not need to go to a committee work session, and that's why there's no committee recommendation before you.
All right. I don't see any lights, so there's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous among those present. Okay. Item number 7. This is a public hearing on Bill 27-19, Administration, Human Rights, Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee established. This bill would establish a racial equity and social justice program, establish an Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice in the executive branch, remove the Chief Equity Officer position in the Office of the Executive as a non-merit position, and require the executive to adopt, by Method 2 regulation, a racial equity and social justice action plan for the county. It will also require each department and office to develop a racial equity and social justice action plan, and require the executive to submit a racial equity and social justice impact statement to the council for each bill and for each management initiative or program in the recommended budget. The bill would also establish a racial equity and social justice advisory committee and set forth the composition and duties of the committee. Furthermore, it will require the planning board to consider racial equity and social justice impact when preparing a master plan. The public hearing will continue this evening at 7 p.m., and the Government Operations Committee work session is scheduled for Monday, November 4th. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business on October 30th, so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee's consideration. If you would like to follow the progress of a Council bill, the Council website has a subscribe function. Go to the Council website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. In our first group, we have John Poxtes, David Hill, Lex Morgan, Melissa Goman, Julio Murillo, and Carmen Nazario Vega. And also remember that there is a button at the base of the microphone. When it's your turn, please press it to activate the microphone, and then when you're done, press it again in order to deactivate it. We will start with Mr. John Poxtes.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is John Poxis, President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Metro Maryland, a nonprofit affordable housing homeownership provider working in Montgomery County since 1982. I would like to thank lead sponsor, Councilmember Navarro, and co-sponsored council members Jawando, Rice, Hucker, Reamer, Katz, Albornoz, Friedson, and Glass for introducing this important legislation. I'm here today to voice Habitat for Humanity's strong support of Bill 27-19, particularly as it relates to land use and housing. According to the New York Times, for every $100 in a white family wealth, black families have just $5.04. Moreover, 1 in 4 black households has zero or negative net wealth compared to less than 1 in 10 white families, according to the Economics Policy Institute. This is unacceptable and is caused by generations of racism, segregation, and unequal access to opportunities. The largest asset for most families in our nation is their home. For years, families of color were denied the ability to purchase homes and to purchase homes in neighborhoods of opportunity through government policies like redlining. Across our country, this has not only led to disparities in income and assets, it has also led to disparities in schools, transportations, and nearby public amenities. Since Habitat for Humanity's founding in Conania Farm, a racially integrated community established in 1942, the organization has been working to build socioeconomically integrated communities where all people have access to safe, decent, and affordable housing. Over and over, Habitat has seen generational change that comes with purchasing a home. Children of homeowners are more likely to be healthy and miss fewer days of school, go to college, earn more money, and many end up inheriting more wealth. It is imperative that we ensure every family in our community has access to opportunities allowing them to thrive and reach their full potential. We appreciate the Council's dedication to social justice and racial equity. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much. David Hill.
Good afternoon, Council President and members of the County Council. My name is David Hill. I'm here today solely as my role as Chair of the Commission on Social Action at Kingdom Fellowship AME Church, formerly known as Reed Temple African Methodist Episcopal Church in Silver Spring. Thank you for holding this hearing and to receive comments on Bill 2719. I applaud this Council for all that you have done and all that you are doing in this field, and your unanimous support for taking critical steps toward establishing a racial equity and social justice paradigm in Montgomery County. Kingdom Fellowship became its own standalone congregation on March 31st of this year. We have over 5,000 members. As such, we believe we're probably the largest congregation of African Americans in Montgomery County. And in response to your request for input, the Commission on Social Action hosted on June 8th 2 community conversations on racial justice and racial equity and social justice. We heard from almost 100 people, and it's based on those comments as well as the learned experience of our leadership and members that I'm here today to heartily endorse this bill. This bill is an important first step toward a meaningful decision-making process that will begin to right the wrongs purposefully inflicted on African Americans since before this nation's founding. But taking all the steps that Council President laid out that will be taken by this bill, it won't be enough if people are simply looking to check the box, write a report, and move on. Meaningful action, anything that you can do to put some teeth into this movement forward, is critically important. But I urge you to ignore those who may tell you this is a waste of taxpayer money, or that we don't have time, or that resources are better spent elsewhere. Ignore them, but urge them to take the same racial equity training that each of us have taken. Because most people ignore the steps you're taking because they don't understand this nation's history that is foundational to what you're trying to do and what we're all trying to do here. I urge you not to merely pass this legislation. Remain vigilant that this momentum behind that you've already identified behind starting this process continue. As we all learned through the history taught and training that we received at the Racial Equity Institute, the forces that benefit from white supremacy, and even whether they know it or not, or whether it's cloaked in biblical scripture, will stop at nothing to perpetuate the situation that has benefited them and hurt African Americans and poor people of all colors since before this nation's founding. Thank you.
Thank you. Lex Morgan.
People are hard to hate close up. Lean in. A quote by Dr. Brene Brown. To the Montgomery County Council, thank you for sharing your time and allowing me to speak before you today regarding Bill 27-19. As a woman of color, a parent, and resident, thank you for establishing the Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative in Montgomery County, Maryland. On June 26, 2019, I was invited to attend the community conversation on racial equity and social justice. The experience was invaluable. Human beings, above all else, is what we are. We are human before our roles as children, parents, siblings, extended family members, friends, leaders, public servants, and/or community members. It is not our roles that suffer when we experience a personal trauma or loss. It is our human experience that suffers. Moving in requires that we explore below the surface to uproot uncomfortable truths in order to properly identify challenges and produce the most appropriate solutions. Therefore, I am in support of the infrastructure of Bill 27-19. The detailed research and examination of leading jurisdictions that have implemented procedures and products using the best practices recommended by the Office of Legislative Oversight is reassuring. I am Ronika Lex Morgan, owner of Emerging Triumphantly LLC and a current member of AmeriCorps Project Change. I also serve with Family Learning Solutions as a mentoring and life skills director. In that role, hybrid mentoring, life skills, and stress management coaching services are offered to vulnerable populations. Basic human needs are essential for all human beings. Shelter, food, belonging, and achievement contribute to well-being. When human needs aren't met, oftentimes deficiencies are demonstrated inwardly and outwardly through destructive behavioral patterns, those that impact child welfare, health, interactions with the criminal justice system, and economic development. In that light, adverse childhood experience science is an area of inquiry. Most people, not just vulnerable populations, have a score of at least 1. Research shows that chronic and life-threatening illnesses have been linked to ACE scores of 4 or higher, a truth for many of those in our most vulnerable populations. ACEs impact areas of focus outlined in OLO report number 2018-8. To what degree are ACEs being addressed as part of Bill 27-19? The OLO report offers details regarding processes and products used to further racial equity in the leading jurisdictions. However, racial diversity is vastly imbalanced. Based on this observation, what aspects, if any, will Montgomery County adopt from those used by leading jurisdictions? How will implicit and explicit bias resources be included in the training framework for decision makers within the county with regard to racial equity and social justice? In closing, this is an extraordinary step in a powerfully uplifting direction for our county. Thank you so much for bringing forth Bill 27-19.
Thank you. Melissa Goman.
Good afternoon, Council President Navarro and County Council members. My name is Melissa Goman, and I'm offering this testimony in strong support of Bill 27-19 on behalf of Jews United for Justice, or JUFJ. JUFJ works to advance economic, racial, and social justice on behalf of Montgomery County and throughout the Baltimore-Washington region by educating and mobilizing our local Jewish communities. We're a member of the Montgomery County Racial Equity or MORE Network, and we are supporting the amendments they're offering as well. We greatly appreciate Council President Navarro's leadership in sponsoring this legislation and the support of all the County Council members in co-sponsoring it. The Torah and Talmud teach us that humans in our infinite diversity are all made in the divine image, and each of us is precious and deserving. But we recognize that the 55% of Montgomery County residents who are people of color are denied many of the opportunities that white residents experience. It is a moral imperative that our county work to end practices that harm communities of color and to implement policies that ensure equity for all residents. So we urge you to pass the strongest possible version of this legislation so that the county can be a place where everyone, regardless of their race or nationality, can earn a good living and afford a decent home and attend great schools and feel safe. In order for this to work as a grassroots organization, we know that the communities must continue to be very involved and to have a seat at the table. We commend President Navarro and the Council for the extensive community engagement process you've had so far, such as the community conversations held around the county, one of which JUFJ co-sponsored. Going forward, we recommend several additional amendments to strengthen community voice in this process. One would be to create a nomination process for the Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee that would include input from the community. We also suggest that the committee be expanded to 15 members so that at least 9 could be community representatives. And we recommend that you provide compensation for committee members based on financial need so that need does not become a barrier to participation. We have several other recommendations in our testimony. And we also recommend strengthened training. Training is very important, and we recommend that it be provided to all county employees on a regular basis and not just managers and supervisors. As Jews, we have a moral obligation to create a community where all can grow and thrive regardless of race and nationality. This bill is an important step on the county's road to racial equity and social justice, and we urge you to pass it with these suggested amendments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Julio Murillo.
Good afternoon, Council President and members of the Council. My name is Julio Murillo, Government and Strategic Relations Specialist at CASA. CASA is a regional immigrant community organization with deep roots in Montgomery County. We provide an array of direct services for our members, such as vocational training, health services, ESOL classes, citizenship services, legal services, and much more. We are a direct services organization with advocacy. Our members are the ones who establish and lead our advocacy efforts with the purpose of fulfilling our mission to create a more just society by building power and improving the quality of life in working class and immigrant communities. To our community and all communities of color, it is clear that we live in a society that for generations it was built against us. We need to begin to fully address these racial inequities, and that can start at the local level. That is why CASA proudly supports Bill 2719. We want to thank Council President Navarro for her leadership on racial equity and the rest of the Council for expressing their strong support for this bill and their commitment to create an equitable Montgomery County. The Racial Equity Bill is a historic piece of legislation and establishes a model for the region and the country. We're excited that we are finally discussing fundamental inequities in the county because our community and the data shows that this is real. For example, according to the Community Action Board's 2018 Faces of Poverty report, the poverty rate for black children is 16% versus 2% for white. Also, over 50% of residents who live in poverty speak a language other than English at home. Bill 2719 is a comprehensive bill that establishes structures and mandates action plans with the objective of improving racial equity and poverty indicators. As we move forward with the legislative process, we want to highlight the following in order to maximize the impact of this bill. First, the Racial Equity and Social Justice Office is tasked with critical responsibilities that require resources. The Racial Equity Officer will need to be fully funded and provided with support and staff. Not having a clear mandate for adequate funding in the bill for this office can put in jeopardy the success of this bill. Second, the racial equity analysis for each county bill needs to carry the same weight as a fiscal analysis. County bills should not be enacted if it maintains the status quo or negatively impacts people of color. Third, there needs to be clear language on community engagement metrics and accountability structures. Every agency and the Racial Equity Committee needs to work with the community as they carry out their duties in this bill, and there needs to be consequences if those duties are not met. To conclude, this is a generational defining bill, and we must work together to ensure it accomplishes its objective. Bill 2719 is the first step in a long and challenging path for racial equity. We look forward to working with the Council on this bill, and thank you again for your commitment and your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. Carmen Nazario Vega.
Good afternoon. My name is, Carmen Nazario Vega. I am a County Citizens Advisory Board public representative in Germantown. I want to thank all of you for supporting this bill, which I believe is a process that's very much needed to respond to our needs in our diverse communities. And I want to thank you for the transparency. As a Puerto Rican and as a member of this community, I have found many disparities in the employment application process for Montgomery County government positions. I have applied for many openings with similar requirements, the difference being that some require being bilingual. I have a master's degree, over 20 years experience in human and social services. I've been ranked most often eligible, may be contracted for interviews, but this is wonderful to know. But what is disturbing is that I would most definitely receive interviews requiring bilingual, but for others not requiring bilingual with similar work experience and qualifications, I have not been. Now, yes, it impacts me because I've seen job openings posted requiring Spanish speaking in up-county government positions and other sites, but they're listed with recruitment sources. And most often these are temporary, seasonal, or part-time positions. The salaries have been between $12 and $17 an hour. In the up-county office, I have witnessed the constant change of bilingual staff in the reception area. How practical is it to pay recruitment sources in order to save money in salaries and benefits to an individual and expend the time to train a revolving door of temp employees? Why do bilingual skilled Spanish-speaking applicants and part-time and temps be relegated to second-class status employees for the county? Our community's ongoing support for legal and illegal immigrants is much admired, and yes, through contracted resources, many are being served. Nevertheless, not all Spanish-speaking citizens of Montgomery County are immigrants and may have different needs to be met by the many Montgomery government departments. County executive legacy has been to increase minority hiring and plentiful, but not equitable in the representation of communities. I would like to see all bilingual job descriptions receive salary, promotion, and merit same as non-bilingual positions. In fact, perhaps consider monetary compensation for the time to use dual languages in all aspects of the jobs, translation and writing, conversation, reading, and essential documents. It would be a challenge, but perhaps necessary, for an overhaul of the selection of candidates by the merit system and qualifying candidates so as to have a balanced number representing the community. I would also appreciate the ability to receive or be able to inquire as to reason for non-selection for interviews, once considered eligible but may be called for an interview, regardless of age. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and I appreciate all the work and effort you're doing for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we don't have any lights, which is fine, because what we want to do is hear from you, so don't think that we're not interested in your feedback. But I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. So thank you so much for coming today. All right, Group B is Daryl Thorne, Diego Uriburu, Dayo Akinsheye, Joanna Silver, Victor Del Pino, and Leanne Tobias. Daryl Thorne.
Good afternoon, council members, and thank you for having me. I first want to start off by saying that I do support the bill. I want to give you brief background because this is what contextualizes my feedback to you, which I'm hoping is received as constructive feedback to further the bill. So I am professionally an academic. I am an assistant professor and program chair of an interdisciplinary program that uses psychology and sociology as the foundation. So it is from this particular perspective that I offer my comments. You have my written statement. However, there are some additional things that I wanted to add to that. A couple of the concerns that I have, again, to strengthen the bill is in the matter of language. As I reviewed the bill numerous times, when I looked at the operational definitions, they really needed to be tweaked. They are not necessarily accurate, and the one that stands out the most is one of the foundations, which is social justice. As drafted currently, it characterizes social stratification, which is different than social justice. So my concern with that is that language is a powerful tool that we use to get across our ideas and draft policy. It also influences how the actions are practiced and how people interpret those actions. And so with this particular bill, there needs to be extreme clarity in terms of how everyone is interpreting the definitions inherent with this bill. So that's a suggestion. I have other suggestions by line in the written statement, but that's very powerful. The second piece in terms of language is that of method 2, the method 2 regulation. So I've inquired about it. I've looked at the method 2 regulation. And I have to say, as just a county resident and not connected politically or with government, it's very ambiguous. And so it's confusing, and I ask that there's clarity so that everyone is on the same page and understanding what exactly that means. Additionally, in terms, and some of the previous speakers addressed this, but the importance of the committee configuration is, I can't express how important that is. I don't know what the process is. I am open to being part of it. But what I really need to say about that is that the people need to have some type of emotional stability. They need to be able to recognize that this is could be seen as contentious to people who don't support the bill, and we need to be able to handle that, and they need to work together to make sure that the essence of the bill is brought forth. This is a long-term goal, and so this is not anything that to be taken lightly. So again, I thank you for engaging and entertaining my thoughts, and again, thank you.
Thank you so much. Diego Riburu?
My name is Diego Uriburu. I'm the Executive Director of Identity, and today I am testifying on behalf of the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Equity and Excellence. I want to start by recognizing Council President Navarro for leading the efforts to implement Bill 2719, and also extend my thanks to the entire Council for their co-sponsorship of this key piece of legislation. As a coalition focusing on educational equity in Montgomery County Public Schools, the introduction of legislation designed to further racial equity and social justice has significantly amplified the coalition's work. Our communities have long experienced educational inequities, but the recent unveiling of MCPS's data confirmed the shocking realities that disproportionately impact poor students of color. The introduction of this legislation, in tandem with the release of MCPS's data, has sparked critical conversations whose impact will extend far beyond the realm of education into all areas of county life. Both the work done by the Black and Brown Coalition and the county's implementation of Bill 2719 will encounter significant pushback from those that mistakenly believe in a zero-sum game, that all improvement in the quality of life for Black and Brown communities will equate to a loss in the quality of life for the most privileged. Emphasize, mistakenly believe. For that reason, it is imperative that our communities, those most affected by the inequities we seek to fix, not only get involved and be actively engaged in these efforts, but we must also support you, our county leaders, before, during, and after the passage of this bill. And as Identity Kids would say, we got your back. To end, the coalition would like to once again present you with our asks. One is that all students, particularly Black and Brown students, have access to effective teaching and diverse teachers, and that these teachers get the support they need to succeed. Two, that all students, particularly Black and Brown students, attend schools led by effective and diverse leaders, and that they get the resources that they need and the supports that they need in order to succeed. And third, that all students, particularly Black and Brown students, be engaged in and supported to master rigorous coursework to ensure success in college and careers. So let's work together to dismantle patterns of systemic inequity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dayo Akinsheye.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts and concerns as you prepare to embark on the challenging and necessary task of elevating and prioritizing the message of racial equity and social justice as an operating paradigm for our county. My name is Dayo Akincheye. I am a longtime resident of the Forest Glen neighborhood of Silver Spring. As a retired educator and county taxpayer, I felt compelled to testify in support of this bill. The fact that we as a nation are just making attempts to grapple with the long history of inequality and injustice is unconscionable. However, as we discuss disparities in education, we must not attempt to gloss over the fact that the period of colonization, the transatlantic slave trade, and enslavement are not sufficiently covered in our classrooms. If they were, I would not be sitting here petitioning for the renaming of 5 Montgomery County schools that are named after the owners of enslaved people. According to the Montgomery County policy on naming schools, schools are named after deceased, distinguished persons who have made an outstanding contribution to the community, county, state, or nation. It is therefore an act of symbolic violence to allow any individual to honor any individual who participated in the slave trade or who owned people as chattel. The act of honoring such individuals by naming a structure after them and then requiring our children to attend schools in those structures is an assault on their humanity. These 5 Montgomery County schools are symbolic and physical manifestations of those systemic and institutional values and priorities that label their ancestors as property. We must ask ourselves whether we are the overwhelmingly pro-slavery Montgomery County of 1860, in which even most Unionists were anti-abolition, and Abraham Lincoln received only 50 votes. At the time when some of these schools were named, the county was controlled by the outsized influence of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Now, with the implementation of this new policy, it is time for us to reverse this wrong and tackle the much-needed task of renaming the 5 schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Joanna Silver? Thank you. Joanna, can you press the button? There you go.
My name is Joanna Silver, and I support the passage of Bill 2719. I'm a resident of Silver Spring and a member of several organizations, including Jews United for Justice, the Silver Spring Justice Coalition, and Tacoma Park Mobilization. All of these organizations are members of the Montgomery County Racial Equity Network. I am also the coordinator of the Montgomery County Deportation Defense Coalition, which advocates for county funding for legal representation for immigrants in removal proceedings. I support the amendments that have been and will be requested by other members of the MORE network. But before I address these amendments, I want to express my concerns with the ambivalence that I've repeatedly seen this council express when it comes to issues of criminal justice and racial equity. Virtually every member of this council appears able to accept on an intellectual level that the criminal justice system in this country is rooted in racism and is one of the primary systems perpetuating racial inequity. Yet when it comes to making policy decisions, this council seems unwilling to elevate this evidence-based understanding over the fear of being perceived as soft on crime, or over the emotion-based belief that people who've been involved in our criminal justice system are inherently bad or less worthy of our beneficence. For example, and this is just one example, when you refuse to fund legal representation for immigrants detained by ICE because they have prior criminal convictions, you are making a policy decision that promotes racial inequity because you are ensuring a worse outcome for Black and brown members of our community through the many ways that deportation and family separation create negative outcomes. And you are basing the decision to impose these outcomes on an individual's involvement in our criminal justice system where they have already experienced negative outcomes because of their race. I also want to make sure you know that anti-Black racism in particular rears its head here just as it does elsewhere. I recently learned that while only 7% of undocumented immigrants in this country are Black, 20% of undocumented immigrants who are deported as a result of criminal convictions are Black. Turning to the requested amendments, I will name only a few. First, departmental equity officer or liaisons should be members of senior management for their departments. This is important to ensure that they have the support and authority to do the work the bill demands of them. Second, the bill needs to be more specific in terms of training requirements. Who will be trained and how often will they be trained? There are several other amendments I want to mention, but I do want to, I guess, focus on the fact that I think the bill needs to have more community engagement, a larger number of community members on the Racial Equity and Social Justice Committee, and more details regarding how often and in what way community impact input will be included. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor Del Pino.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Victor Del Pino. I'm a lifelong resident here of Montgomery County. Prior county employee at the State's Attorney's Office here in Montgomery County, and also a partner of a law firm here in Montgomery County and Rockville that employs several individuals. Today I'm before you as the co-chair of the Latino Health Initiative, the steering committee. On behalf of the Latino Health Steering Committee of Montgomery County, we urge you to vote in favor of the enactment of Bill 2719, which would establish a formal process for addressing racial equity and social justice here in Montgomery County. The Latino Health Initiative Steering Committee is an independent group of volunteer professionals and community leaders working with county government to address Latino health issues and concerns here in the county. The Latino Health Steering Committee provides expert guidance and technical assistance in conceptualization, design, development, and evaluation of health activities and projects within the Department of Health and Human Services. In addition, the Steering Committee acts as the advisory body for the Latino Health Initiative of Montgomery County and advocates throughout the process here and throughout the county. Addressing inequities and fighting for social justice has been at the cornerstone of the Latino Health Steering Committee's values and work. We applaud the County President Nancy Navarro as a sponsor, and also all the council members as co-sponsors for taking a significant step to institutionalize the norms of racial equity and social justice into the work of the Montgomery County government. The county will join various jurisdictions around the country who have already taken this very pivotal step. While the bill includes critical components and is comprehensive, we do offer the following recommendations for enhancement. In addition to the overall equity training for managers and supervisors, tailored capacity building and technical assistance from the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice should be offered to the entire professional, technical, administrative, clerical staffs of each department and office. We also feel that it's vital to incorporate equity measures in the performance assessments of the department directors and other senior managers in county government. Also, funding for the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice should be allocated in the county budget as a line item and sufficient to support an operating staff that is going to be able to do its job. The advisory committee should have 13 members, with at least 7 of those being public members instead of only 3 public voting members. The racial and ethnic composition of members should be proportional to the overall county breakdown of these groups. The advisory committee should have ex officio members who do not vote, such as the chief administrative officer or one of his assistants. Other ex officio members should include a director of the Office of Management and Budget and one of the special assistants of the county executive. In addition, the committee should include an ex officio as a sworn officer of the police department. Montgomery County has a unique opportunity to show its leadership and take a significant step forward in creating a formal process to address racial equity and social justice. The Latino Health Steering Committee looks forward to working with the county to make this vision a reality. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. Leanne Tobias.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Leanne Tobias. I'm a long-term Bethesda resident with expertise in sustainability, green buildings, affordable housing, and commercial real estate. Bill 2719 is a necessary and fundamental measure, and I strongly support it with a single exception. The proposed amendments to the county's greenhouse gas emissions law inappropriately weaken assessment requirements for greenhouse gases and undercut the county's efforts to serve as a leader on climate change. Montgomery County's 2008 greenhouse gas law, now in force, requires the county, when considering land use plans, to assess the plan's potential impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Bill 2719 substantially weakens this requirement by merely charging the county to consider the environmental impact of a plan. In other words, the county's primary responsibility shifts from assessing the climate change impact of a land use plan to merely considering it. I join with the written testimony submitted by the Sumner Citizens Association and the Westmoreland Citizens Association, which represent over 1,000 households, to ask you to retain the original greenhouse gas assessment requirements passed by the Council in 2008 by leaving sections A, B, and C of the statute unchanged, while adding a section D on racial equity and social justice as already proposed in Bill 2719. SURGE, Standing Up for Racial Justice of Montgomery County, has also endorsed this change. The revision ensures that the county continues a robust program to minimize greenhouse gas emissions, including a mandated impact assessment, while ensuring that racial justice and social equity are explicitly considered in land use planning. I appreciate that Council members Navarro and Friedson are already evaluating this revised language, and I thank you for your leadership on this point. In general, I just want to thank you for your consideration. I'd further like to point out that the National Resources Defense Council has observed that people who live, work, and play in America's most polluted environments are commonly people of color and the poor. Environmental justice advocates have shown that this is no accident. The Council's desire to enhance racial equity and social justice demands the strongest possible greenhouse gas emissions law. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just very briefly, we do have some lights. I just wanted to share that, of course, when we get into the work session, as we do with every bill, we will take into consideration all the amendments. Traditionally, we don't necessarily specifically in our legislations refer to funding because the code is very clear that funding is really subject to appropriation every year. But we do sometimes include a reference, just like we did with our Inspector General. And so I will be working to make sure that we have language that refers to the fact that the council's intent is that the resources need to be there in order to stand up this office. But I do want to also make clear that the code is also pretty straightforward, that every year the council, of course, has to make the final decision on budget. So it's not like it's a guarantee, because it is subject to appropriation. So I wanted to share that as well, and really appreciate the issue of the definitions. We'll take a look at the particular definitions to make it much clearer and also clarify what method 2 is. It just means that the council has to approve because a lot of the things that are called in legislation, in the regulation is where a lot of the logistics get sorted out. I also want to turn first to Councilmember Friedson, because he had asked me, he wanted to clarify the issue of greenhouse emissions, and if you can go ahead and clarify that.
Yeah, thank you, Council President. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Mr. Bias, thank you for your testimony. We have received considerable concern about the greenhouse gas emission standard, working with Council President Navarro as the sponsor. We did have an amendment. It's on Circle 21 of the packet that does effectively what has been requested to clarify this issue. I think it's important to note that it is not our belief on the council that the legislation as proposed did substantially weaken or in any way weaken the greenhouse gas emission standard, but in order to alleviate the concerns that have been expressed by many in the community, we did want to clarify it, and that amendment, while it obviously hasn't been voted on, we'll be taking it up in committee, has been introduced, and at least 2 people on the committee have weighed in on it, and one sitting in between us. So we'll be taking that up, and I just wanted to make sure we clarify that. And we've tried to share that with everybody who has reached out to us, but if you could spread the word, it would be helpful, because I think it is not the focus of the legislation, and hopefully the robust discussion that we're going to undertake in committee and at the full council will focus on the core tenets of the legislation. This was not something that was intended, and hopefully it's now been clarified.
Thanks so much, and I will reach out to others to spread the word.
I also forgot to mention that with regards to the training that has been cited, I'm also very sensitive to that and believe that it is definitely important, and some of the jurisdictions that we examined do have mandatory training for all employees, as well as particular conferences that the public can also attend. So we'll look at those things as we get into the committee conversation. Councilmember Rice.
So it's interesting. Ms. Silver, you touched a nerve. And you touched a nerve because I think that, again, while I agree with you that our criminal justice system is rooted in racism and certainly is one of the primary systems that perpetuates racial inequality, continuing to allow people to take advantage of communities that have no way of escaping that environment is also racial injustice. To allow for criminals to continue to prey upon folks who are trying to make a better way of life for themselves is also racial injustice. And so just saying that you can return a person who hasn't been changed, who hasn't had that sort of support that we need to get them to make better decisions is also racial injustice. If you go to some of the areas to where this continues to happen, like in Germantown, to our mobile home park, to other areas to where we have folks that prey on those people who have no way out, that also is racial injustice. So it's not just as simple as waving a wand and saying everybody is out, everybody is free. We've got to do more than that. As a person who was a victim of murder in his own family, as a person who's had a gun held to his head, who's been robbed, I can tell you now that when you have those kinds of things that happen to you, it certainly is an impact and shapes what your view is and what you think, and it makes you understand a victim's perspective. And so I just urge you in your quest for benevolence that you also consider that as well, because you also have to consider where a person lives and the fear that innately is in them when they've been a subject. All you have to do is take a trip down to D.C. and hear from victims who talk and plead with their government to please do something because they have folks who continue to return and prey on their communities. We're trying to do something different here to make sure that we strike a balance. It's hard to achieve what that balance is, but I won't just sit by and say that that balance should be shifted to one side or the other, because that's not what our community is asking for.
Thank you, everybody, for coming over and sharing your views. Really appreciate it. Group C, Michael Bader, Drawa Hall, and Brandy Brooks. Mr. Bader.
Hello, thank you to the council for hearing from me. I am Michael Bader. I am the Associate Director of the Metropolitan Policy Center at American University. I'm also an alum of Richmond Montgomery High School and a current resident of Silver Spring. I am coming to speak in support of Bill 2719, and I want to start by telling a story in my neighborhood in Silver Spring and Forest Glen. A couple of weeks ago, several weeks ago, we experienced a rash of break-ins in our neighborhood into cars that were parked overnight. This is a common experience at the end of the summer. And a couple of the people on the listserv admitted to leaving their door open, and so it was nothing really major, but someone suggested that we ask the police to increase patrols in our neighborhood. And as I was thinking about that, I thought about results that I had just received from our D.C. area survey, in which we found out that more than half of Black and Latino residents in the D.C. area were concerned about police arrest or questioning in their daily lives. Half of those, so a quarter of Black and Latino residents in the D.C. area were concerned in their daily lives a lot. In comparison, the white residents in the D.C. area, about 13% had any concern, and of those, the vast majority were only concerned a little. So as we consider the changes that you propose to make in the county code, I would ask that we think about making big changes, but also thinking about the very little ways that the interactions in daily life come about and the ways that we measure those in what happens. My neighbor wasn't racist. I don't even think she maybe even suffered from implicit bias, but rather what I like to call racial blind spots, the spots where we don't know about each other's daily lives and don't know what affects each other. And it wasn't just in policing either. About half of black residents and about 2 out of every 3 Latinos didn't think businesses in or around their neighborhood thought that businesses thought about people like them when they built and made business decisions. Mental maps of the region differed too. More than half of whites in the D.C. area reported not knowing anything about Wheaton, Glenmont, while fewer than a quarter reported not knowing anything about Bethesda. I commend the County Council for seeking ways to address racial inequality, and I encourage you to pass Bill 2719. But reducing racial inequality requires knowing where these blind spots exist, and knowing where these blind spots exist requires good data. The subtle but insidious ways that blind spots perpetuate racial inequality will remain hidden if jurisdictions such as Montgomery County rely on administrative data like census tabulations, test scores, and incarceration rates alone. Unsurprisingly, as someone who studies survey methods, I like representative surveys like the DC area survey, but there's other ways that the council can make sure that the ongoing process of making sure that you find people where they are and not rely on public testimony, and that needs to be in the bill as well. To invest in racial equity, Montgomery County should pass this legislation, and I would encourage you to add in data acquisition as well.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. Mr. Hall.
Good afternoon.
Please press the button.
There we go. Good afternoon. My name is Dwal Hall, and I'm the political organizer for 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East, in Maryland and D.C. I am also a Montgomery County resident of the Kentlands community in Gaithersburg. To Council President Navarro, members of the Council, committee staff, and others involved in the convening of this public hearing, I want to thank you. To the many community members, racial justice advocates, faith-based groups, young people, human rights activists, and the MORE Network members and community leaders in attendance, I would also like to thank you. I appreciate your advocacy and the efforts of the Council to move this legislation forward. Under the leadership of President Navarro, who engaged with many of the folks in this room and listened to their concerns, experiences, and priorities of constituents, I expect that we all can create a legislation that we can be proud of. 1199 is the largest healthcare union in the nation, representing 450,000 healthcare workers on the East Coast. Since our founding in 1932, our mission has been to stand up for quality healthcare, good jobs, and social justice for all. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called 1199 his favorite union and referred to us as the authentic conscience of the labor movement. We have been in the fight for racial justice, equality from the beginning, and the struggle continues. Reverend Dr. William Barber, leader of the New Poor People's Campaign, said, when the forces of extremism become so overwhelming that they depress the hope of the people, the prophetic voice of admission is to connect words and actions in ways that build restorative hope, so a movement for restorative justice can arise. In Montgomery County, our members care primarily for communities most vulnerable, aging population in long-term care facilities countywide. As black and brown residents in this community, many of our members face challenges that impact their day-to-day experiences, traveling to and from their jobs, taking their kids to school, and choosing how to spend their leisure time. We support this bill because these residents shouldn't be treated unfairly by police because of their race. The children in their neighborhoods shouldn't be breathing air that is more polluted than whiter neighborhoods. The zip codes of their children's schools shouldn't determine the quality of their education, but right now, without this bill, these are the realities that they could be facing. That is why, as a partner with the MORE Network, 1199 SEIU is in support of Bill 2719, because there are drastic inequities and disparities experienced throughout the county in many facets of the public sector. This bill sends a bold message from the county government that racial equity is a priority. However, the legislation could be strengthened with the inclusion of the amendments being put forward by the MORE Network and other advocates. These amendments include how social justice is defined, the guidelines on who is trained on racial equity, and how often, what role the advisory committee plays in upholding the standards of this legislation, and how much funding this office requires in order to adequately perform the duties outlined, and compliance regulations and consequences. As we move forward, we are eager to work with Council President Navarro and the County Council to ensure that we pass the strongest version of Bill 2719 possible. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Brandy Brooks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony today on Bill 2719. My name is Brandy Brooks. I'm a resident of Tacoma Park, a community organizer and consultant with 15 years of experience on social, environmental, and economic justice, and a member of the Montgomery County Racial Equity or MORE Network. I want to start by thanking you, Council President Navarro, not only for your leadership in the introduction of Bill 2719 and the community process leading up to it, but also for your ongoing commitment over the years to fighting for immigrant communities, people of color, women, and other people in Montgomery County who face marginalization and discrimination. I also want to thank all of the members of the County Council for co-sponsoring this bill and for deepening your own learning through training and through engagement in community conversations throughout this year. As high community turnout at every racial equity town hall and forum has demonstrated, Montgomery County residents are eager for us to devote the serious attention and resources toward justice and equity for county residents, and particularly for residents of color who have faced discrimination, exclusion, harm, and violence due to both cultural norms and public policy rooted in a legacy of racism and white supremacy. As we all know, racial injustice and inequity are not going to be solved with a single bill. There must be ongoing work to transform the culture and practices of county departments and the county council. There must be ongoing engagement with community members, supporting their leadership in defining the problem, developing solutions, and determining whether policies have meaningful impact. And there must be an ongoing commitment to providing an adequate level of resources, not only for the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, but also for community members of color who are leading in their communities on building new systems and institutions. My full detailed testimony outlines all of the amendments that I'm recommending to this bill. There are three that I want to focus on right now. The first is an amendment to make sure, and I think Council President Navarro, you addressed this, that funding allocation for the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice is included as we move forward or on figuring out how to communicate the intent of the council around that in appropriations. I think you've heard from many people that how critical that is. The second is that Section 281CE must be amended to place a time limit on how long bills can be allowed to move forward without meeting the requirements for a racial equity impact statement, as well as a requirement that no bill can pass after that time is over, which has a negative racial equity impact. Community members deserve to know that the council will be holding itself accountable to evaluating its decisions using these statements, and that it is committed to no longer advancing any policy that has a negative racial equity impact. And lastly, we need to alter the composition of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee so that it is community-based and community-led. Its deliberations need to be grounded in community leadership and accountability, rather than in existing government entities that too often are the agents of injustice and equity, however unintentionally. I believe that residents of color in Montgomery County and all who value racial equity and justice deserve the strongest possible version of Bill 2719, and I look forward to working with you all to achieve that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brooks. So we will have another public hearing this evening at 7 p.m. And let me just really thank Ms. Morgan for wearing the T-shirt that says she became who she'd been waiting for. That is my desire and my wish for all the young women and not so young women like me to be inspired to always, seek a more just world. So thank you so much for that message today. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming and sharing your views.